Today, we are starting with the Plenary Session 3. The session will be chaired by Father Dr. Kahle. Father Dr. Kahle is a renowned theologian, educator, and an ecumenical leader, and he is serving as the director of Sovereign Orthodox Academy. He is also the chairperson and professor at the Dr. Carlos Gregorius Chair at Mahatma Gandhi University in Kottayam. He holds degrees from Saraipur University, West Bengal, a master's degree from Leuven, Belgium, and a doctorate from Paris. Father Dr. Jones has held several distinguished positions internationally, including professor at the Brose Ecumenical Institute, Geneva, and the moderator of the program committee of the World Council of Churches. Father Dr. Jones is the executive editor of the Malayalam Research Journal published by the Benjamin Bailey Foundation. Dr. Jones has in-depth knowledge in many languages like French, Syriac, and Latin. An erudite scholar, thinker, and writer, he has published numerous books and articles in both English and Malayalam. In addition to delivering many lectures and presentations at international forums, through his immense contribution, he has created a platform for articulation of fresh ideas and insights that transcend the limits of modern thought. We are privileged to have Reverend Father Dr. K. George with us to chair this session. Welcome, sir. Over to you.
Thank you. We begin the first session on walking on the edge of science and spirituality. And the first presentation will be by Dr. Madayo Kahle from Switzerland. And the second one is by Dr. Pankaj Sekhsaria on climate crisis, the technology of wisdom, the interdisciplinary approach and solution. They will be briefly introduced and welcomed by our friends. But make it short.
Dr. Madayo Kahle brings a unique interdisciplinary perspective with a PhD in religious studies from Universidad Interdisciplinary and an executive MBA from IESE Business School. As president of Foundation Serbia, Switzerland, and trustee of Satish Kumar Foundation, he works at the intersection of spiritual wisdom and practical action. He is also a member of Jane Goodall Legacy Foundation Council for Hope, contributing to global conversations about consciousness, spirituality, and our relationship with the natural world. His work explores how ancient wisdom traditions can inform contemporary approaches to environmental and social challenges.
Dr. Madayo Kahle, unfortunately, we have a very limited time for a presentation. I understand. So we have to be very brief because we have to finish this session by 10:15. It will include some discussion. You have seen a little bit on the screen on three edges. Three edges is a poem which I wrote in 2014. Published somewhere. Because the word edge was interesting to me. The edge, of course, it is the very delicate line between the material world and the infinity. And the edge is important in everything. So I don't want you to spend much time on that, but gives me my idea of the end. Okay, forget it. Now I invite Dr. Madayo Kahle to make this presentation. Yeah, just forget about the end.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Good morning to everybody. First of all, I would like to express. Doctor? Better, sir? No better? Okay. First of all, I would like to express my deep gratitude to the organizers and the hosts of this event, and for the kind invitation and the wonderful organization. It is for me a true pleasure to be here today and to participate in this event during the celebrations of the 100th anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi's Parada, his birth anniversary and the anniversary of his university. I must confess that I was somewhat surprised to be invited to speak here today, since I no longer consider myself right now to be a scientist. Much less do I think I have become a sage. However, after reading the introduction to this conference, I decided to convert this presentation into a personal one, for reasons you will hopefully understand. I believe that one key motivation for organizing this event is impulse to reconcile and overcome the apparent opposition between being a scientist and being a sage. In this sense, such an event is a great opportunity to contribute to the integration of aspects which have long time been separated, and which now need to be integrated again, to lead our planet into a more sustainable future. I chose the title Walking on the Edge of Science and Spirituality for my presentation, since for many years I have perceived a strong separation, almost a cutting edge, between my research and my beliefs, between what I was doing professionally and what I felt as my personal mission in life. I'm not saying that it was a mistake, or that this happened without being aware of what I was doing. But as you know, there are phases and stages in life, and finally, once I reached my 50th birthday at the beginning of the year, I felt strongly that I had reached a turning point, and therefore I started to work actively in integrating the different aspects of my life which I cannot separate before. I've not been talking about research and life in public for many years, and I probably have never combined these two aspects in public before. In this sense, this presentation had a personal step for my life. Born in Munich, I grew up in a quite open spiritual surroundings, strongly inspired by the spirituality and vibrant creativity of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Went to Waldorf kindergarten and school, Christian community, and received inspirations from the legacy left by Guru Simon. After moving back to Spain, reading the book Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, dreaming of going to the Himalayas to find my Buddha there, I found it in Spain, not so far from my home. Reincarnation was always natural and a fact for me. However, it came as a surprise to start to recognize some people from the past. Since I was still in my early 20s, I thought that I needed to communicate my exciting discoveries with affected friends and family members. And I did this with astonishing and intense experiences. But soon I had to recognize that these revelations were quickly relegated by the others and did not help them. Other complications and confusions did arise as well, which pushed me to leave this aspect of my life aside for many years. Since I was starting my studies in classics, I focused on trying to learn Greek, Latin, and Hebrew, even though I always felt that I was not especially gifted for learning languages. My motivation, however, was to be able to access the sacred texts in their original language. At least I managed to be able to understand and translate passages, even being always quite dependent on dictionaries. It fascinated me to learn about different structures of the language, especially the old archaic ones, which are perceived much more powerful than their modern descendants. After finishing my bachelor's and master's degrees, I asked my professor who taught me some courses of Vedic and Sanskrit languages and literature if he would accept to be my advisor for my doctoral thesis. He accepted, and to my surprise, he proposed, would you be interested in working on the topic of transmigration of souls in India and Greece? My answer was immediate, of course, without giving him too much information about how important this topic of reincarnation has been for me in the past. I was quite impressed by this striking synchronicity. Becoming a researcher, I experienced during this first phase of my professional life the war between personal beliefs and my academic research as a solid dividing element. I was advised to do it this way. Otherwise, they told me the academic value of my work would have been at risk. Therefore, both aspects were hosted in separate chambers and not well communicated. Proceeding with my research for my doctoral thesis, a major milestone was for me to present my first paper ever during the fourth International Event Workshop in Austin, Texas, in front of all the living scholars and experts of my bibliography. I had to present what I considered a new interpretation of two of the most well-known hymns of the Liquid, the funerary hymns 1014 and 1016, which are presented as a description of two different ways to heaven. In parallel, I started to look at an incredible number of parallels surrounding the image of a human being as a charioteer. Surrounding a charioteer in Kathopanishad and Plato's Phaedrus, presenting my discoveries in a lecture in Harvard with the title, Is There Indian Influence in Plato? This work was greatly supported by the professor of Sanskrit at Harvard, who acted as my unofficial advisor for my thesis. The enthusiasm about this idea expressed by the members of the Greek philosophy department, however, was at that time limited. Simultaneously to my research, I co-edited a book for which I asked 19 experts write about reincarnation in that topic, in the academic field and topic of research. Of course, I was the only one who even considered the possibility that the idea of transmigration could be real. After 7 years, I defended my thesis. Mission accomplished. However, the moment of my graduation was not ideal, since Spain was in a deep financial crisis, and there were no new postdoc or scholarships or positions on the horizon. Looking at this moment from today's perspective, I understand that my destiny did not allow me to proceed with my academic work because at this stage, I did not manage to integrate the different aspects of my life and being. I had to go at least an extra round. Therefore, I decided to study for an executive MBA at a prestigious business school, starting to work in the renewable energy sector, especially in the areas of photovoltaic and gravity source heat pumps. Before getting married, my belief in reincarnation became again a personal topic for me. Since my wife is Catholic, and it was hard for her to accept. I wrote a letter to former Pope Benedict, asking him for help and advice. I told him that I always kept the hope that he was going to change the official doctrine of the Roman Catholic Church concerning the belief of reincarnation. To my surprise, 2 weeks later, I received a letter from him, appreciating very much my surprising letter, apologizing and telling me that his position, he was retired at that moment, and his health does not allow him to anymore to open a new theological discussion. However, he sent me all his blessings. Around 12 years ago, began what I call the second stage in the abstract. A long-time close friend with whom I had a deep spiritual connection had created a foundation called Fondation Salia. She considered that I was ready to be introduced to the board, and I was admitted. The mission statement of Salvia Foundation is quite visionary, especially taking into account that it was written 20 years ago, and broad and holistic. It is agroecology, animal welfare, democracy and responsible economy, holistic education, and finally, consciousness. Being designated as a successor in her role as chairman of the foundation, I started a new phase in which my life consisted in facilitating the work of others. Following her methodology, rather than accepting and receiving applications, I started to go out and look out for projects we might consider relevant for our mission. For logistical reasons, we decided to focus only on Europe. Our approach is to consider our grantees as our family. They are the ones who execute the projects with great dedication and professionalism. We consider our role as being weavers, bringing initiatives together and opening spaces for collaboration. For almost 10 years, even our late founder did not dare to present to the board any project in the field of consciousness. But shortly before our major surgery, she told me, Madayo, we need to start looking for projects in the area of consciousness. The question was, what can you do with such a thematic? She had already contacted Rupert Sherman, and I took over the correspondence with him. We offered him some support in his research, and especially for one of his postdoc students. Rupert Sheldrake, for me, is one of the most relevant scientists. I'm sure that he will be one of the most relevant scientists when we look back. And he has a strong relationship with India. Rupert Sheldrake introduced me to David Lorimer, Global Ambassador of the Scientific and Medical Network. David Lorimer started with our support what we consider one of our core projects, the Galileo Commission. The aim of the Commission, as reflected in the Galileo Commission report, which is there and which I encourage you to download and read, is to facilitate the necessary paradigm shift, approaching science with a much wider scope, overcoming some limitation imposed by the materialistic science, but is now more generally called positive materialist science. Then we met Evelyn Elzézer, who is an expert in the field of after-death communication. She had developed an incredible network of people willing to share their experiences. After an initial project with her alone, we encouraged her to collaborate with an academic institution. Finally, Professor Chris Rowe from the University of Northampton accepted to host the project in his department. In a very short time, we were able to build up the most relevant database of after-death communication testimonies in English, French, and Spanish, following strict academic procedures. After publishing the initial quantitative analysis, it started to present and publish peer-reviewed articles in academic journals. Supporting the work of Professor Chris Rowe at Northampton University, we are currently funding PhD students who research on after-death communication, near-death experience, mediumship, and terminal lucidity. Closer to nature are projects which are aimed to holistic education in consciousness, such as the Nature Institute, the Paris Center, Alice Trust, and of course the Insurgents Trust and Juma College. Not mentioning several projects we have in nature education. A very special project is our collaboration with the Roots and Shoots program of Dr. Jane Goodall. As you know, she passed away last week. I treasure in my heart some very special moments I could spend with her. To be nominated by Jane as a member of her consort for Hope was very special for me. She was a truly extraordinary woman who inspired already several generations, spreading the message of hope around the planet until the very last day of her life. And now I'm going to share excerpts of an interview which was recorded earlier this year, and it was only with a promise to be released only after her passing away. And if it's fine for you after listening to the video, I would invite you to keep some moments of memories to honor her life.
Where I am now, I look back over my life. I look back at the world I've left behind. What message do I want to leave? I want to make sure that you all understand that each and every one of you has a role to play. You may not know it, you may not find it, but your life matters, and you are here for a reason. And I just hope that that reason will become apparent as you go through life. I want you to know that whether or not you find that role that you're supposed to play, your life does matter. And that every single day you live, you make a difference in the world. And you get to choose the difference that you make. I want you to understand that we're part of the natural world. And even today, where the planet is dark, there still is hope. Don't lose hope. If you lose hope, you become apathetic and do nothing. And if you want to save what is still beautiful in this world, if you want to save the planet for the future generations, your grandchildren, their grandchildren, then think about the actions you take each day, because multiplied a million, billion times, even small actions will make a great change. I just hope that you understand that this life on planet Earth isn't the end. I believe, now I know, that there is life beyond death, that consciousness survives. I can't tell you from where I am secrets that are not mine to share. I can't tell you what you will find when you leave planet Earth. But I want you to know that your life on planet Earth will make some difference in the kind of life that you find after you die. Above all, I want you to think about the fact that we are part, when we're on planet Earth, we are part of Mother Nature. We depend on Mother Nature for clean air, for water, for food, for clothing, for everything. And as we destroy one ecosystem after another, as we create worse climate change, worse loss of diversity, we have to do everything in our power to make the world a better place for the children alive today and for those that will follow. You have it in your power to make a difference. Don't give up. There is a future for you. Do your best while you're still on this beautiful planet Earth. But I'm not done playing from where I am. God bless you all.
Inspiring young people to take action is crucial for our times, as it is to educate and inform young and not so young people about the importance of approaching our world from a holistic perspective, integrating our different gifts and capabilities. The co-partner of this conference, Dr. Satish Kumar, has already talked about human knowledge, and Dr. Mona Nasseri will deepen in its pedagogical approach later today. It was an encounter with both of them which initiated what I'm calling a third phase. Becoming a trustee of the Satish Kumar Foundation and during my presentation to the broader team of the Schumacher College, I realized that every single activity I had been doing during my life so far, so different areas, could be potentially helpful for my activity as a trustee of this new foundation. It was clearly time for integration. Together with a very complementary team and with the immense blessing of working under Satish Kumar's inspiring guidance, it is a pleasure to contribute to the transformation of the college into Schumacher College 2.0 in a spirit of collaborative creation. Science and spirituality are integrated, and there are no traces left of a cutting edge between the two. Radical Love is one of the most essential, inspiring, and relevant books I have read, and I take every opportunity to hand over a copy to colleagues, collaborators, and friends. It is an important reminder to keep the message as simple as possible, condensing its essence, to take away the deep spirituality of nature and celebrating its magical diversity is the most relevant teaching one can receive. Head, heart, and hands, or soul, and society are the conceptual, methodological, and educational triads which help us to incarnate our being and to be present and active on this planet Earth. After this short introduction, don't worry, I will finish soon. And as a way of conclusion, I would like to share a list of essential insights and aspects I have filtered from all the inspirations received and the activities I have described, which I'm going to present now as bullet points in my final 5 slides. First of all, I want to present some tendencies which I think are relevant. Materialism is a belief system which, in its exclusivity, has become outdated. Post-materialist science is widening the scope. Science and spirituality are coming again closer to each other. Quantum physics plays an essential role there. First-person observation is no taboo anymore. Our awareness can be more informed and conscious now. Time is accelerating towards artificial intelligence on one hand, but also towards spiritual awakening. There are several ways to succeed in this integration we need. First is looking outside. There's the field of research, everything what you're doing right now, but it's very relevant to acknowledge that we are nature. Nature is our best teacher. We need to study the details, but we should not forget the wider context, holistic approach. Scientific methods are valid and important, and a phenomenological approach is very helpful in many fields. Looking inside, know yourself. Act from your whole being. Integrating all senses. Developing and expanding perceptive skills. Reconnecting the brain and the heart. Developing critical thinking, critical feeling, and therefore critical sensing. Connecting the inner departments which are not well connected so far. And listen to your inner voice. Listen to your heart. There are some barriers and some dangers if you follow this way. Integration does not mean to mix everything and to create confusion. If you want to proceed, you need to eliminate all prejudices and prefix ideas. Do not be afraid to fail. Be brave to face information you receive, even if it contradicts your theories. Apply always common sense. Observe and analyze, applying a concise and coherent methodology and criteria. Honesty and an ethical approach are essential for a sound methodology. To prepare ourselves for the future, it is important to feel the connection with nature, the planet, and the universe. We need to strengthen our spiritual awareness to be prepared to face artificial intelligence. It is time for approaching the ancient wisdom with an extended knowledge. If you want to change the world, you need to start changing yourself. Relevance of creating small islands of coherence. Let us celebrate diversity in unity. Accepting that consciousness and love are primary and fundamental to everything else. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Madayo Kahle, for enlightening us with this new edges, new borderlines between the dual things which we normally understand as separation, isolated. So thank you very much. Now we invite Dr. Pankaj Sekhsaria to make a statement on Plenary Crisis Plenary Session.
Professor Pankaj Sekhsaria is an associate professor at the Center for Technology Alternatives for Rural Areas, IIT Bombay, where he focuses his scholarship at the intersection of science, technology, environment, and development. With a PhD in Science and Technology Studies from Maastricht University, he investigates how societal values, policies, and innovation practices interact, especially in the context of environmental governance, citizen science, and island ecosystems.
Dr. Sekhsaria, we're very grateful that you could leave some time for this session because there are many questions from the students and others. Thank you.
Good morning. Am I audible at the back? Yeah. Audio okay. Good morning. Thank you very much. I'm deeply honored and privileged to have been invited to speak here. Dr. George, Dr. Naushad, MGU, and very distinguished panel, and it's absolutely amazing and thoughtful presentation that we just heard. My name is Pankaj Sekhsaria. I have been an environmental activist and researcher for a very long time. And for about the last 10 years, I have been an academic, working broadly in the field of what one might consider the sociology of technology. And I am going to try and present to you the title of my talk, which I come to, is the climate crisis, the technology question, and an interdisciplinary approach. And I try and lay out both the context of what this interdisciplinary approach could be, and also more importantly, how do we actually address the technology question? And even more fundamentally, what really is the technology question? So that's what I'm going to try and approach this whole presentation with. I'm going to draw upon my own research, my own journey, a little bit like you just done, and it's going to be a little bit of a khichdi. So I'm going to try and pull different things from different places, and in the end, hopefully, we can make some sense. Uh, about a year ago, in January of 2025, I was at the Hyderabad Literature Festival, and there was a very prominent journalist there who was also attending. And the day after his session, and we were in different sessions, he put out this tweet, which I happened to come across. And I found it very interesting, and I just read this to you to actually get to the heart of what the technology question in the context of today is. So the journalist writes, and he's a very popular journalist, as you will see at the bottom. His tweet had about 300,000 views, so it's a very prominent influencer, as you can imagine. Here you can see the number. So the journalist writes, of all the big metros I traveled to, Hyderabad seems the most future ready. Yes, it has traffic bottlenecks, but at least there is a genuine sense that the city has been preparing for its infrastructure for future growth while retaining an old city charm. Now, it was very interesting because if anyone of you has been to Hyderabad, the part of where we had the festival was what is known as high-tech city, which is built up on a landscape that is a few billion years old. You have rock formation, you have ecology in that place that's at least a few million billion years old. And coming from the new airport in Hyderabad, you're actually bypassing the old city. You're driving on these expressways, smooth traffic, like the journalist mentioned, completely in some senses oblivious to the history and the reality of that place. And I found it very striking for him to argue in a short trip of a few days or a couple of days that this was a city that was future ready. And the question that came to me and has been there for a while and even earlier is, what does it mean to be future ready? Because I don't think that we are in present ready today. This belief in technology, this belief in infrastructure, which I think is very relevant and important, these have become God terms in the sense that we are not willing to question them at all. Things like innovation, things like infrastructure. And I think science and technology actually pushes us to very interesting ways towards that discussion that we need to think about. And just as a matter of fact, today in the Hindu, if you have read the newspaper, there is an article on the crisis that Hyderabad is facing as of today. So while we are claiming that we are future ready, how is that possible if we are not even present ready today? And I will just give you two examples of the context and the crisis that we face. You will see this image and you see this image. This is an image of California in March of 2025, and this is an image of Gaza, also around the same time. So whether it is what is causing what and the destruction that we face, when this is the situation today, what does it mean to be present, to be future ready? As of today, I think is a big question that we have to investigate. So when I was preparing my presentation today, I kind of put climate in brackets because climate crisis is only one that we are facing. And like I said, there is a technology question. So what I would want to do is not to posit one against the other as a way of approaching, as a way of trying to investigating the problem. It is not a for technology or an against technology argument. It is trying to look at what we have in terms of academic disciplines and largely the sociology of technology to approach the situation, to approach our reality, to approach the crisis we face, not head on, but from angles that will hopefully open up ways of which we can look at the world, and primarily a world of modern science and technology because, like my supervisor at Master's University says and many others say that we are all technological cultures, but just that the technologies are different. And how do we engage with these? We have to confront them sometimes, but also question them in interesting ways. So, like I mentioned, it is not an anti or pro technology question to begin with. We can end up there. But what is the technology question that we might want to ask? What should be the technology question that we are asking? Because I think we have been part of that movement for the last 30, 40 years in India as being an environmental activist of being anti or pro technology. And I think it is important to have a position, but there might be a more nuanced and more graduated and calibrated way to engage with that. And then I come to the third question in the slide. I think how do we ask the technology question? I think is a very interesting and an important methodological question. And in the last 8, 10 years of my work, I don't say I have the answers, but I think I found some ways to explore this technology question, which I will share with you today. And I think in the way that you ask the question, in the way that you do our research, somewhere embedded between the method and the question is also the answer. We can turn the question and sometimes the answers turn because the question has been turned, and I give you some examples of that. And I think to summarize these three, I think the question of the Anthropocene that we discussed yesterday of the coming climate crisis, if not the existing climate crisis, really forces us to ask this question. And I'm just going to present two sets of graphs to you, which many of you who are aware of the discussion on the Anthropocene will recognize quite immediately. These are socioeconomic trends, and you see this very interesting set of graphs, which was also showed yesterday by Abhilash on the web. You know, from the middle of the 18th century, you take all socioeconomic trends, population, real GDP, at the bottom right, you see eco production, the water use, the large dams. There is a very interesting phenomenon in these graphs from about the 1750s to about the 1950s, the middle of the 20th century. They are all roughly parallel. And then in the 1950s onwards, virtually every single parameter that we evaluate, even an Earth system trend, I'll show you the next slide, actually goes at about 60 or 70 degrees from 1950 onwards to present day. There is a very interesting overlap between these two realities. Uh, and you see the same thing with Earth system trend, with carbon dioxide, with nitrous oxide, you get again bottom right, nitrogen, the coastal zone, all these parameters, and this is the scientific evidence, science that we have is giving us the evidence that between 1750 and about 1950, most of these trends were very kind of slow, they were growing slowly. And if you talk to scientists, they say we were surprised at how 1950 onward, almost like the entire thing coming together. This is what in this field is called the great acceleration. Almost all parameters of the socioeconomic indicators and of Earth system trends shoot up at about 1950. This is in some senses the proof of the climate change that's coming, and also the Anthropocene, which remains a debated question at this point of time. But the evidence is kind of quite stark, it's quite shocking. And there is no denying the fact that what the coming of the Anthropocene, as the term itself suggests, is that for the first time in the history of the planet of millions of years, there is a force, the human species, that becomes more powerful and more effective than all Earth systems put together. So all the rivers and the earthquakes and the volcanoes and the movement of the oceans and the movement of the water, we become more powerful. We are able to shift the balance of the earth. And there is no denying the fact that this is only possible because we have something called technology. As tools and techniques, and as technology, we as a species have been able to mobilize that to bring about these phenomenal changes, which we now realize is perhaps pushing us to the edge, and we can't deny the role of technology there. So this being the point, I am going to now make my first jump to give you some examples of what people historically in philosophy, in sociology, have approached the question of technology and the society-technology relationships with formulations which are very profound, which are very useful, but are pretty much not there in the discourse that we have, certainly not the technological institutions of the kind that ITG tried. In the early 20th century, Lewis Mumford, a well-known philosopher, articulated two forms of engagement of the capacity of the human being. One was the polytechnique and one was the monotechnique. And he articulated the monotechnique, which is the second one, which is technology for its own sake, which oppresses humanity as it moves along its own trajectory. It is based on scientific intelligence, quantified production, it is directed towards economic expansion and military superiority. And he actually gave the example of the automobile in the early 19th, early 20th century. And I think I made a jump here to just say that this aligns so much with the ideas of Gandhi and Schumacher and others. What is technology? What is the role of technology? What is our relationship with technology as it were? And he also posits the monotechnique with the polytechnique, which says enlists many modes of technology, providing a complex framework to solve human problems. It is life-oriented, not work-centered or power-centered. More recently, there's another scholar, again in the United States, Sheila Jackanoff. She has some very interesting articulation which I find in great parallel with what Mumford had offered. And again, like I said, I'm just giving you these as snapshots to say and show. And what I have learned is there might be ways in which we can approach this relationship in ways that we have not been opened up to, for instance. So, Jackanoff talks of the technology of hubris. He talks of the technology paradigm in which we are. which ignores uncertainty and ambiguity, which focuses on the known and the extent of the unknown. It produces overconfidence in the accuracy and the completeness of the pictures they produce. They are dependent on well-defined short-term risks, which command more attention than indeterminate long-term ones. And for example, this question of chemical toxicity, the number of chemicals that we are adding and the soups of chemicals that we are making, how are we ever going to be able to predict that whole thing? And she posits the technologies of hubris with a very beautiful formulation, writing from what I've seen, are the technologies of domain. And she said these are methods or better institutionalized habits of thought that try to come to grips with the right fringes of human understanding, the unknown, the uncertain, the ambiguous, and the uncontrollable. If our lives, if our systems are not fully knowable, as has been repeatedly said yesterday and later, are not certain, they are not in our control. Imagine having a world that is uncontrollable in that sense, it is ambiguous, we don't know fully, and imposing a paradigm of technological development which relies on the idea of complete control, of certainty, of knowing fully, there is bound to be a mismatch. And I think that is where we have to renegotiate, reopen the discussion on what technology should be, what technology we have, and what is it that we need going forward. So there are then more transactional methods of how to go and do about that in various ways of involving the citizen, involving the public. But that's more in terms of what we can do. But the idea that we have to reopen the discussion and see what is the relationship between the science and the technology that relies is based on certain ideas and a world that's perhaps operating on certain other principles or fundamentals. How do we kind of bring them together? I think it's a very interesting challenge that I really this also then opens up questions, for instance, of what is skill, what is drudgery, what is quality, what is efficiency, what is relevant. And I put all of these because these are some of the givens, the taken for granted kind of categories in the discourse on science and technology. We have a certain idea of what is skill. The entire paradigm of what is efficient, which is why hand-done processes, weaving, spinning, farming, all become inefficient because they are evaluated by certain modes of productivity. We do not fit into the slow and the small processes that again have been so beautifully discussed by Gandhi Schumacher and many people. And what it also does, and I found it very interesting, it has allowed us and allowed me to ask questions of some of the categories in modern science and technology which we otherwise take completely for granted or don't engage with at all. So the question of infrastructure. We just don't realize that, or we look at infrastructure in one particular way, but there are other ways of understanding infrastructure. And for the shortage of time, I won't go into that, but something to think about. This question of innovation. What really is innovation? And there is argument in many places saying we do not want the new. I mean, it is okay to have the old because the old is working just fine. Innovation becomes what we go for paradigm of innovation for the sake of innovation. The question of repair and maintenance. One of the most powerful insights I have learned from this work is that systems, infrastructures operate not just because they are created, but because they are repaired and they are maintained. And in our entire science and technology paradigm, even in our modern structure, the space for the person who repairs and the space for the person who maintains is almost not there. We don't know that they exist. We remember these people, we remember the plumber, or we remember the soldier when it breaks down. The infrastructure that breaks down is the infrastructure that is visible. And those people, those systems, those skill sets who maintain our infrastructure are successful because they are not visible. And you just imagine the kind of skill sets that are there, the amount of network that exists, and the constant work and resource, both financial and human, that goes into maintaining these systems. And if we don't recognize these people, you'll be extremely irritated in the middle of my talk if the lights went off or if the mic stopped working. And it will only not stop working because there is a team that is maintaining and ensuring that the system works. But we don't ever recognize that. We only remember the plumber or the telephone line and repairman when our system breaks down. That's very interesting, very important because there are huge issues and huge possibilities there for circular economy, for recycling of materials, and of course for respect and acknowledgement of those people and those skill set and those systems that allow our systems to continue working. And then there's the other category which I have found very interesting is the non-user of technology. We often end up dismissing people who don't use certain technologies as being left behind, as being Luddites. But the fact of the matter is that there's a gradation in why people choose not to use the technology. So on the one, it's a spectrum. On the one end of the spectrum, there could be somebody who rejects the technology, who says, I don't want the technology. There might be on the other extreme end of the spectrum, somebody, a girl in a village, who wants a bicycle, who wants to use that technology, but she is the wrong gender, she may be the wrong class, she may be the wrong caste, she will be excluded from a technological time. She will be not allowed to use that particular technological object. So, all I'm trying to say is that these ways open up ways of engaging with technology in very interesting ways that they offer us ways kind of forward. I will skip this because I want to talk a little bit about this massive infrastructure project, what I said in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, which we have been working on, but I leave that for another time because we don't have much time. I want to go to the next jump that I will make is to the world of academics again, to a field in sociology or in science and technology studies. And this is some work that I use myself. You might be aware of the French philosopher Bruno Latour, passed away recently a year ago, who did some of the most interesting work in sociology and technology. And this is a book he published in the late 70s called Laboratory Life, in which Bruno Latour actually spent 2 years inside a modern scientific laboratory studying what a scientist does. And this is a very interesting passage in the beginning of the book where he justifies why you need to go inside a modern scientific laboratory. And I read this to you, and this is what Latour said in the book. Since the turn of the century, scores of men and women have penetrated deep forests, lived in hostile climates and weathered hostility, boredom, and disease in order to gather the remnants of primitive societies. He said, look at the whole field of anthropology. If one of the most remotest Hawaiian islands or the Andaman Islands or the remote waters of Africa, to study a human community that is interesting, exotic, which actually does not have any relevance for our lives. Because they're also primitive societies that are interesting. By contrast, the frequency of these anthropological excursions, relatively few attempts have been made to penetrate the intimacy of life among tribes which are much nearer at hand. He says there is a set of people whose life is much more important to you and me. They live around us, but we have never managed to spend that much time and effort and resources in studying those tribes. Rather, we have spent millions of dollars and crores of rupees going to a remote forest area to study these people. And he says this is perhaps surprising in view of the reception and importance attached to their product in modern civilized societies. We refer, of course, to tribes of scientists and to their production of science. So what he's suggesting is that he uses the anthropological method to enter the scientific process inside the laboratory, inside the scientific institution, inside the scientific document or the policy document, and study what the scientist is doing from lenses that are sociological and anthropological. And you kind of open up entire new worlds of understanding not just the scientists and the technologists, but the relationship of the scientists and the technologists to society, to what they do, how they do it, what inspires them, and what actually happens in the laboratory. So it's a little bit of getting into the black box of knowledge creation. And because science and technology is so important in modern world today, we are in the whole idea of modernity, the scientific nationality is so central to the modern idea. How does that come about? So you enter the lab or the workshop or a scientific document or a scientific institution with eyes wide open, and you ask the kind of question that you might ask a tribal community in a remote forest or a group of women if you're studying, say, women in a slum in the city or something like that kind. And I did something of this kind for my own work, for my PhD, where I studied 5 nanoscience and nanotechnology laboratories, and it was absolutely fascinating to enter the world of the scientist and the science researcher in a way that I had not done before. And just the way of entering, the way of engaging opens up so many interesting questions and possibilities. That's what I want to leave with you. What those specifics are, We don't have time to go in. I've done a couple of books. I got a few copies if anyone you would like to get them to get a paper. Right? Now, these are the two books. One is a biography of a laboratory. The other is the book called Nanoscale, which is talks about the relationship between society and the scientists who are doing nanotechnology. And I actually based my chapter in the thesis on the four broad characteristics of Indian society, which is patriarchy, which is resource constraint, which is multiple knowledge systems, and they're trying to argue how these social and cultural realities actually can be seen even inside a modern scientific nanoscience laboratory. There are you all recognize this chair, right? And you will also recognize that some people might have a problem with this chair. Anybody has a problem with this kind of a chair? Quickly, a show of hands. Nobody has a problem. Are you left-handed, man? Anybody who is a left-handed person is not going to be able to use this chair, which is almost a default option available anywhere in this country, anywhere in the world. There are very few institutions that have organized for a chair that is meant for the left-handed person. So this is a technological object. Look at this one, and this is not because Obama stands here. It is for the height of the podium behind which he stands. Look at the podium that I am standing behind. An average Indian woman whose height is about, or the height of an average Indian woman is about 5'2" to 5'3". You will not be seen behind this podium. You will be like this. So, what I'm trying to point out to these two small examples, these are technological objects that are default options that exist in our world. They come because of a context. They come because of a history that we are simply not aware of. So if an Indian woman of 5 feet was to make a speaking podium, it is very unlikely that she will make a podium that is 5 feet 6 inches in height, because she will not be able to use it. It's very unlikely that a left-handed person will design a chair that he or she himself is not able to use. And I offer these as examples because they're very obvious, but it is when we ask these questions of even the most basic technological objects that we realize that they are not independent of history and context. And what we take as good quality, what we take as efficient technology, comes from a certain way of looking at the world, which has become the default, and we have to open up those discussions. I will come to the last part of my presentation using a similar method and enter a completely different space in science, which is a policy document. So about 10 years ago, the Government of India, Department of Science and Technology, published a document known as Technology Vision 2035. This is the document in which Indians, all of us sitting here, Indians, I mean, people are not from India, I don't fit into this technology vision, unfortunately or fortunately. We have been categorized into 6 types of Indians of 2035. Now, this is just an exercise in imagination and visioning, but this is a government of India document, this is a formal policy space, and it's very interesting how you and I have been imagined and you and I have been described as Indians of 2035. I will give you just one sample of this and do the exercise before I tell you. This is Indian number 1 of 2035. Not one as in the first, but one of the 6 is this Indian. So there are images. These Indians of 2035 have been imagined as visuals like this one. You can imagine this is based on red. I'm not going to give you any clues. This is Indian number 2 of 2035. Very different Indian number 3 of 2035 from the earlier. Indian number 4 of 2035. Please bear in mind, this is you 10 years from now as the government sees all of us. Indian number 5 of 2035 and Indian number 6. Again, very distinct, right? You see the dark hair, you see the red bindi, you see the long hair, you see the big earrings. So these are the 6 Indians. Now, all these 6 Indians have been put into certain categories. They have been given labels, which is an absolutely fascinating exercise into deconstructing language and imagery. And I'm offering this here because when I enter science and technology in the way that I suggested, it opens up my sensibilities of engaging with the document. You can tell you match the following, right? We did that in school. So on the left hand side, you have the 6 Indians of 2035. On the right hand side, this is again, I'm stressing this. This is the Government of India. This is our official position. technology vision 2035, Indians of 2035. So you have alternative lifestyles and worldviews. You have beehives with production lines. You have the rooted and the remote. And can you guess who might be the rooted and the remote? Certainly, the Steve Jobs lookalike is unlikely to be the rooted and the remote. You can imagine, and you can think for yourself, who would you put in this category, and also in this document that I'm talking about, who is in that category. So make a mental note of which of these six people are the rooted and the remote, or the left out or the left behind. And the question I would also like to ask is, left out of what? Who decided that this person is left out? There's certain vision, and obviously somebody is going to be left out from something. So if you take a mental note, I will now present what the document actually puts, and I don't think you'll be surprised. It is the dark woman with long hair and a bindi and big earrings who is the left out of the left behind. Surprise, surprise. A man in a tie or somebody who looks. So it is a certain look, a certain imagination of who's going to be creating, innovating, and imagining. This person. Now they also say that these are not exclusive categories. But can this woman not be creating, innovating, and imagining? Why does she have to be the left out or the left behind? Any imagery that you use, any label that you could create a problem. But I think it's so interesting and so instructive that this is how we think. And how many problems this can create. The other very interesting thing that is missing in these six, can you guess for a moment, think of what is obviously missing in these six people? There is no child of 10 years old, and there is no old man of 70 or old woman of 70. So we have imagined in India of 2035 with just people in the age bracket of 35 to 40 or 25 to 35. But at many levels, it showed the power of imagination, but it also showed the power of what we are actually working with today and the challenges that we have going forward. How do we disrupt this narrative? The first step would be to understand what's going on in this narrative, and I'm offering I'm going to finish in 2 minutes. How we can enter those spaces, and there are many ways to do that, and I'll be happy to share more of that. I come finally to, it's very interesting, but in the interest of time, I will be out there. I come finally to one small thing that I've been doing. Hopefully tomorrow morning we will screen this film at 9:30. As part of the teaching that I do in IIT Bombay, my entire class goes through a 3-day hand screening workshop. We have somebody who comes to teach us. I teach myself. Over 3 days, a class of 30 learns how to spin on one piece charkha. And it has been the most amazing experience. I think what I'm able to teach in lectures in 3 months, I'm able to do more than that in 3 days of teaching students how to spin. There's a short film, tomorrow 9:30 we'll screen that film. So these are some pictures. On the right hand side, in Mahadar Circle, they are spinning guru. I'm in Bombay, he comes from Pune every semester, and we also do other workshops. Here are the students learning. There's some images. Of course, this is a box charkha, very interesting history to this charkha itself that Gandhi actually developed with his partners and his colleagues in Yaroda. And I will finish by these 4 quick quotes from the students who did the workshop and then they have reflected on the workshop experience. I am from a weaving family, and the workshop brought back memories of my childhood when I observed my grandparents spinning. This workshop made me appreciate that no work is small. Every task requires skill and practice. Another student who we had an initial interesting argument on what is skill and labor, and he reflects after the workshop. My views on unskilled labor felt hypocritical, given I could hardly make a basic thread myself. So it's a very Nepali kind of idea, and we can't do it in an IIT, but to the extent we can. Then the other girl said, after the chat was over, I could feel the vibration. In my sleep, I was dreaming about spinning. So that the impact, the meditative impact is phenomenal, along with the other questions of skill, labor, etc. And the last one is also very interesting. This experience told me that, told me how small a part we play in society. For our clothes to be made, someone cultivates the cotton, someone spins it, someone weaves it, and then we buy it. So that cloth that we buy is as much ours as it is of the thousands of people involved in making it. This fundamentally made me question the whole concept of ownership. Do we really own anything? If we don't, do we really have a right to destroy that thing which we never really owned in the first place? I think it was an interesting experience that seems to have changed a little on how I see the world around me and the role that I have to play in that. So for a young engineering student to be able to so deeply and so profoundly rethink his own role, I don't think I am capable of such deep thinking and such profound introspection. And that the spinning workshop was able to do it for him, and that he was able to think through. Also, in some senses, gives as an indication of the capacity of our youth, but also that there is tremendous amount of it. I will finish there. And then the question, what is left out and left behind? I mean, who is left out? Who's left behind? How do we decide that? How are we going to deal with this question of the left out and the left behind? And I will stop there. Thank you very much for the opportunity. With this time, will be for questions and discussion. That's my email ID, and like I said, I'm sure you said what I've done. They'll be available outside. Thank you very much. Really good.
Thank you, Dr. Pankaj Sekhsaria, for this wonderful presentation. You have taken us to the ways of alternate thinking in technology. It applies also to religion and spirituality, because already